Yes, so I can confirm that Rick Grinnell is in Venezuela today. I can confirm that Rick Grinnell is going to Venezuela, or is in Venezuela, with two immediate directives from the President of the United States. Number one, Rick Grinnell has...
The press room was electric, charged with an energy so thick you could almost taste it. Cameras flickered, their lenses glinting under the harsh lights. A crowd of reporters shifted in their seats, eager for the next big headline. But today wasn't going to be just another routine press conference. There was something more in the air, something that made every word feel heavier. Karoline Leavitt stood at the podium, her expression poised and unflinching, ready to face the room. But her calm demeanor masked the brewing storm. There was tension in the way she held herself, the way she adjusted the microphone as if bracing for the inevitable. Every reporter's gaze was fixed on her, waiting for that moment, the moment she would respond. The first question came quickly. Can you speak on the administration's latest policy regarding tax cuts? The voice came from the front of the room, calm and expected. Karoline smiled slightly, her answer polished, rehearsed, and exactly what everyone expected. Another day, another standard briefing. But before the next question could even rise, another voice cut through the calm. It was sharp, focused, and relentless. Let's talk about the real issue here. The liberal reporter called from the back, her tone carrying a sharpness that made the room pause. She was always the one looking for the controversy, the drama, the conflict. Karoline's eyes flicked toward the reporter, recognizing the challenge. The tension in the air grew thicker, almost palpable. The calm that had settled around the press conference moments earlier was gone, replaced by something far more intense. The words that would follow would determine not just the rest of this briefing, but how the world would see Karoline in the days to come. Karoline Leavitt was no stranger to press conferences. With years of experience under her belt, she had learned how to maintain her composure no matter how tense the room became. Her posture was impeccable, and every word she spoke was deliberate, measured, like a finely tuned instrument. She had worked hard to get to this point, to command the room with quiet authority. But there was one reporter who always managed to throw a wrench into the calm. Elena. Elena was everything Karoline wasn't. She was bold, outspoken, and known for her ability to dig into the dirt of any situation. She thrived on conflict, relishing the moments when she could provoke others into revealing something raw, something real. Her sharp eyes were always searching for the next headline, her pen a constant tap against her notepad, marking time as if the clock was working against her. In the world of politics, Elena was a disruptor. She didn't care about pleasantries or political niceties. She cared about getting to the heart of the matter, no matter the cost. Karoline knew this. It wasn't the first time Elena had tried to poke holes in her carefully crafted answers, but today felt different. Elena's smirk from across the room was a clear sign that she was ready to push Karoline to her limits. There was a challenge in her gaze, something that promised she wouldn't let this moment slip away without extracting more than just a standard answer. Karoline could feel it. The undercurrent of tension between them had been building for months, each encounter, each briefing, adding more fuel to the fire. Elena was determined to expose cracks in Karoline's polished facade, and Karoline knew it was only a matter of time before Elena pushed too hard. Today, it was clear that Elena wasn't just asking questions for clarity. She was trying to create a spectacle. Karoline, let's talk about the real issue here. Elena's voice rang out, cutting through the quiet murmur of the room. Do you think the administration's policies are intentionally designed to suppress certain communities? Karoline's eyes flicked over to Elena, her composure not faltering. But inside, her pulse quickened. She had heard this question before so many times. Elena's insistence, her refusal to let the issue rest, wasn't just about the policies. It was about making Karoline squirm, to get a reaction, to provoke her into a misstep. It wasn't just a policy discussion anymore. This was a test of wills. Karoline's hand tightened slightly on the podium. She had worked too hard to be derailed now. The stakes were high. If she gave Elena an inch, the narrative would shift. The media would spin her response, twist her words, and the headlines would be crafted not from policy, but from the spectacle of the confrontation. Elena didn't care about policy. She cared about the fight, the drama, and how she could use it to make her mark. Karoline knew she had to be careful. One wrong move, one slip of the tongue, and this briefing could spiral into something far beyond her control. This wasn't just about defending the administration's policies anymore. This was about maintaining control of the narrative, about not letting Elena take the reins and turn this into her own show. The room fell into a heavy silence. Elena's question hung in the air like a challenge. Karoline stood tall, her gaze steady, but she knew this moment would define the rest of her day. The confrontation was just beginning, and there was no turning back now. The moment Elena asked her question, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Karoline's calm exterior betrayed none of the tension that was building just beneath the surface. She had answered this question 1,000 times, but today the stakes were higher. Elena wasn't asking to understand. She was asking to provoke. Karoline knew it, and the reporters in the room could feel it too. The air between them was thick with anticipation. Elena leaned forward, her eyes locked onto Karoline's, her voice sharp and almost accusatory. "So, you didn't actually answer my question, did you? Let me clarify. Do you believe that these policies are intentionally designed to suppress marginalized communities?" Karoline's gaze never wavered. She had been in far worse situations than this. The press room was her domain, and she had learned long ago how to keep her cool. She exhaled slowly, the tension in her chest easing just a fraction as she prepared her response. She raised a hand, signaling to Elena that she had heard her and was ready to respond, but there was no mistaking the firmness in her stance. "I have answered that question, Elena," Karoline said, her voice steady, with just the right amount of edge. "The administration's policies are designed to benefit all Americans, regardless of background. If you want to discuss specifics about today's topic, I'm happy to continue." Elena's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a tight smirk. She wasn't backing down. She never did. "But you're avoiding the question, Karoline," she pressed, her voice now rising just slightly. "You didn't give a direct answer. You're avoiding the real issue here." The other reporters shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other, sensing the tension in the room. Some were uncomfortable with the direction this was going, but others were intrigued, their pens poised, ready to capture the next word. Karoline's composure remained unbroken, but the room could feel the shift, like a game of chess where each move mattered. The stakes had never been higher. "I'm not avoiding anything," Karoline responded, her tone unwavering. "I've given you the answer, Elena. If you want to ask about the specific details of the policies, we can discuss that. But this line of questioning is getting repetitive." A few murmurs spread through the room. It was clear that some of the reporters were siding with Karoline. The questions had been asked, the answers had been given. They didn't want to dive deeper into the drama. They wanted the facts. But Elena wasn't finished. She wasn't satisfied with the surface-level answer. The game was just beginning. "You're avoiding the question because you can't answer it directly?" Elena shot back, her voice rising again, laced with sarcasm. "This isn't about the details, Karoline. It's about the bigger picture. Are these policies intentionally hurting marginalized groups? Yes or no?" Karoline's jaw tightened ever so slightly. The room was no longer just a place for press questions. It was now a battleground, one where Elena's every word aimed to break Karoline's composure. The other journalists were watching closely, some clearly uncomfortable, but others were leaning in, hungry for the next exchange. The pressure in the room intensified. Every eye was on Karoline, waiting for her response. She knew this moment was critical. A slip, a misstep, and it would all be over. The media would spin her response into something far beyond a policy discussion. Elena's smirk was a signal that she believed Karoline was weak, that she could provoke a reaction. Karoline had to hold her ground. "I have answered your question," Karoline said, her voice low but sharp, "and I will not continue to engage in this line of questioning. If you have a relevant question related to the topic at hand, I'll answer it. Otherwise, we will move on." Elena's expression shifted slightly, no longer the playful smirk, but a flash of frustration. So, that's it, Karoline? Elena challenged, leaning forward, her eyes almost boring into Karoline's. You're just going to ignore the concerns of millions of people? Are you really going to avoid giving a straight answer to something so important? Are these policies harming communities or not? The tension in the room was suffocating now. Karoline's eyes flicked toward the back of the room, where security stood, waiting for a signal, ready to step in if things got too heated. But she didn't want to escalate this any further, not yet. She needed to keep control. I've already answered your question, Karoline said, her voice now colder, firmer. This is not about evading the truth. This is about discussing what's relevant. If you don't have a question related to the topic at hand, I will be moving on to the next reporter. But Elena wasn't done. She leaned in, practically pressing her microphone against Karoline's face. The room held its breath. The entire conference now seemed to hang in the balance, teetering on the edge of chaos. Elena's voice was biting. So that's a no comment then? You can't answer the question, can you? Karoline's pulse quickened slightly, but she kept her face neutral. The reporters in the room were now fully invested in the drama unfolding before them. This wasn't just a briefing anymore. It had turned into a spectacle, a battle of wills. I've answered your question, Elena, Karoline responded, her tone sharper now, each word deliberate. I'm not going to repeat myself, and I'm not going to play your game. Elena's face contorted in disbelief. So, you're refusing to answer the question? Is that it? Karoline held her ground, her hands planted firmly on the podium, her gaze steady and unwavering. This is not about refusing to answer. This is about you trying to hijack this press conference. I will not engage in bad faith arguments. The silence in the room was thick now, oppressive. The battle of words had reached its peak. Every reporter in the room was watching, waiting for the next move. Elena's next question was almost inevitable. One last attempt to break Karoline's resolve, to push her over the edge. The tension was unbearable, the atmosphere so charged, it felt like it could snap at any moment. And then, Elena's voice cut through the silence again, sharper than ever. You're afraid, aren't you? Afraid to answer the hard questions. You're afraid the truth will come out. She smirked, waiting for Karoline's response. Karoline's eyes narrowed just slightly. The weight of the moment pressed in on her, but she refused to show any sign of weakness. She had worked too hard to let one reporter derail her. With a calm breath, Karoline finally spoke. I'm not afraid of the truth, she said, her voice low, but carrying an undeniable authority. What I'm not going to do is let you use this press conference to make a spectacle of it. If you have a real question, ask it. But if you're just here to create a headline, I'm done. The words hung in the air. Elena looked taken aback for a moment, but only for a second. Her frustration was evident, but there was a new respect in her eyes, one born of knowing she had pushed Karoline to her limits. The room was silent for just a moment longer, before Karoline gestured toward the back of the room, signaling that she was ready to move on. The tension in the room reached a boiling point. The reporters were on edge, their eyes darting between Karoline and Elena, sensing the inevitability of what was coming. Elena's relentless questioning had been escalating for what felt like an eternity, each question more charged than the last. But now, Karoline's patience had run out. Karoline's jaw tightened, a subtle shift in her posture signaling that she was done playing along. She had been calm, controlled, giving Elena every chance to ask her questions and pushing back with the same measured responses. But this was no longer about the issues at hand, it was about something deeper. It was about control, and Karoline was done letting Elena take the reins. I've answered your question, Elena, Karoline said, her voice now cold, cutting through the rising tension in the room. Her words were sharp, final. I'm not going to engage in this back and forth with you anymore. If you want to continue this conversation, I'll be happy to discuss the policies at hand. But if you're just here to provoke a reaction, you've got nothing left from me. The room went still. Karoline's voice echoed in the silence, ringing with authority. She had drawn a line, and she wasn't about to let Elena, nor anyone else, cross it. For the first time since the briefing began, there was a palpable shift in the room. The energy that had been thick with anticipation now felt like it was hanging by a thread. Elena blinked, taken aback for a brief moment, but only a moment. The reporter's usual smirk faded, replaced by a flash of frustration. Karoline could see it in her eyes. Elena wasn't prepared for this. She hadn't expected Karoline to stand firm, to end the game on her own terms. "You're really going to just shut this down, huh?" Elena scoffed, leaning in once again. "You're refusing to answer the question. You're silencing the truth. You can't handle the heat, can you?" Karoline's eyes narrowed as Elena's words bounced off her. The reporter had been poking at her weaknesses, trying to goad her into making a mistake. But Karoline was no longer playing the same game. The control had shifted back to her, and she wasn't going to let it slip away again. The room's energy shifted yet again. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't a press conference anymore. This was a confrontation, a standoff, and Karoline had every intention of winning it. "I'm not silencing anyone, Elena," Karoline said, her voice now unwavering. "I'm not going to sit here and waste time on bad faith questions. You want transparency? You want the truth? Here it is. I've answered you, and I'm not here to entertain your theatrics. If you've got something relevant to say, I'm happy to hear it. Otherwise, I'm done with this." A few reporters glanced around the room, as if unsure how to react. They were used to seeing politicians squirm, to watching them fumble under pressure. But Karoline wasn't squirming. She was standing her ground, and that made the room feel different. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. Elena was no longer in control. But Elena wasn't ready to give up. She leaned in again, her voice now dripping with disdain. "So, it's just like that? You'll silence me, shut down the press because you don't like the questions? Are you that afraid of what people might find out?" The question hung in the air, sharp and biting. It was the final provocation. Karoline could feel the pressure mounting again, the weight of every reporter's gaze on her. But she wasn't going to back down now. "You've got one last chance, Elena," Karoline said, her voice steady, but carrying an edge that was impossible to ignore. "You want to ask a real question, ask it. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next person. This is not about you, and it's not about me. It's about the facts, and I've given you all of them. If you're not interested in the facts, then we're done here." For a moment, Elena hesitated. The smirk that had been a permanent fixture on her face was gone, replaced by a look of disbelief. She had been trying to create a spectacle, to push Karoline into making a mistake. But instead, Karoline had taken control of the situation, asserting her authority in a way that left no room for negotiation. Elena opened her mouth to speak again, but Karoline raised her hand, cutting her off. "We're done," she said firmly. The finality in her voice was unmistakable. "I won't engage in this any longer." The room held its breath. Every reporter in the room felt the weight of the moment. Karoline had done it. She had ended the confrontation on her terms, and now it was over. Elena could try to continue, but Karoline had drawn the line. The tension that had been so thick moments before suddenly dissipated. Elena was no longer the driving force in the room. Karoline had taken control, and she wasn't about to let anyone take it away from her. "Next question," Karoline said, her voice cool and collected, her gaze sweeping over the room. She was back in charge, and she was ready to move forward. The shift was palpable. Karoline had stood her ground, refused to be bullied, and in doing so, she had not only ended the confrontation, but had reaffirmed her authority. The battle had been won, and the room, once full of tension, now fell into an uneasy but respectful silence. The moment Karoline ended the standoff, the room was plunged into an awkward silence. The reporters were still processing what had just happened, an unspoken acknowledgement that the power dynamic had shifted. What was supposed to be just another routine briefing had turned into something far more intense. And now, in the aftermath, everyone was keenly aware of the shift in momentum. Karoline, her posture still straight and composed, scanned the room briefly. She could feel the eyes of every journalist in the room on her, some with admiration, others with curiosity, and a few with barely concealed frustration. Elena stood there for a moment, mouth open as though she was about to say something more, but Karoline's piercing gaze silenced her before another word could be spoken. Elena was the first to look away, visibly shaken, her plans to derail Karoline's authority thwarted. The other journalists, sensing that the tension had finally broken, slowly started shifting in their seats, their pens scribbling notes at a feverish pace. Some reporters exchanged quick glances, while others whispered among themselves, clearly rattled by the unexpected turn of events. It was rare to see someone stand their ground so firmly in the face of such aggression. Karoline took a deep breath, her voice calm but unwavering as she motioned to the next reporter. "Next question," she said, her tone firm and final, signaling that the time for confrontation was over and the briefing would continue. But the weight of the moment lingered in the air, and no one dared to move just yet. The energy in the room had shifted dramatically. The reporters who had once looked to Elena for the next viral moment now seemed to look to Karoline. The dominance that Elena had hoped to claim had slipped through her fingers, leaving Karoline standing resolute, the undeniable victor. Minutes later, the fallout from the press conference started to unfold beyond the walls of the room. Within moments, news outlets were picking up the story. Headlines flashed across the screen, each one spinning the events differently. Leavitt cuts reporter off in tense confrontation. Press conference turns into showdown after reporter pushes too far. Leavitt defends administration, shuts down liberal reporters' provocations. Social media exploded with reactions. Some lauded Karoline for standing firm and refusing to let herself be bullied. They praised her composure and leadership, seeing the moment as a display of strength in the face of aggressive questioning. Others, however, quickly took to their keyboards to decry her actions as an attack on press freedom. The hashtag Leavitt silences the press began to trend, with a fierce debate igniting across the country. Some called her a hero, others accused her of being dismissive and authoritarian. In the press pool, whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see that? She didn't even flinch," one reporter muttered, a look of awe in their eyes. Another added, "She cut Elena off like it was nothing. That was incredible." But there were those who had a different take. "She's just trying to protect the administration from tough questions," one journalist remarked, shaking their head. "She shut Elena down because she didn't like the direction the questions were going." Despite the mixed reactions, there was no denying the fact that Karoline had successfully steered the narrative. What had begun as a simple press conference was now a topic of national discussion. The clash between Karoline and Elena had become the headline, not the policies or the substance of the briefing. The media coverage became a battleground of its own. In the days that followed, pundits from both sides of the political spectrum debated the confrontation. Was Karoline justified in defending her position? Or had she undermined the integrity of the press by shutting down legitimate questions? The event became a symbol of the ongoing struggle between politicians and the press, each side accusing the other of manipulating the truth. For Karoline, the fallout was both a victory and a burden. The media machine had already begun to spin the story, and she knew that no matter how she had handled the situation, the public perception would shift in ways she couldn't control. But one thing was certain. She had regained control of the narrative in the room. And in a world where perception was often more powerful than reality, that was a battle won. The days following the press conference were a whirlwind of media coverage and social media chatter. Karoline knew what to expect. Her decision to shut down Elena's repeated provocations would be scrutinized, dissected, and spun into a narrative that would be framed by those who didn't have the full context of the moment. The backlash came quickly, but so did the praise. The headlines continued to pour in. Some media outlets praised her for standing firm against an aggressive reporter, calling her a defender of transparency and a voice of reason in a media storm. Others, however, saw it differently, accusing her of stifling free speech and shutting down important questions. The hashtag Leavitt silences the press was gaining traction, with some supporting her right to stand her ground, while others decried her actions as a dangerous step toward authoritarianism. In the midst of this chaos, Karoline remained composed. She knew this was bigger than just the press conference. This was about the power of the media, the control over narratives, and the lengths politicians would go to maintain their image. She was caught in the middle, with no way of escaping the whirlwind that had ensued. But Karoline wasn't about to let the media dictate the terms of this confrontation. She understood that, in the court of public opinion, the truth was often a malleable thing. She knew the questions, the arguments, and the media's need for controversy. And she was ready to face the fallout head-on. Sitting in her office, Karoline stared at her phone screen, watching the notifications flood in. The comments were mixed, but the constant barrage didn't seem to faze her. She'd expected this. The press would always find a way to twist the narrative, to make their own conclusions based on fragments of truth and half-formed opinions. But Karoline had learned long ago that the real battle wasn't in the headlines. It was in the ability to stand firm, even when everything around you was crumbling. Finally, a message came through from her communications team. It was a simple directive. You need to address this, Karoline. The story's not dying down. She looked at the phone for a moment, thinking. The conversation in the media had already been set in motion, but the one thing they couldn't control was how she would respond. With a deep breath, she composed a statement, one that would both acknowledge the tension without backing down. The statement was direct, unapologetic. What happened in that room wasn't about evading the truth. It was about protecting the integrity of this conversation. I will not allow this press conference to be hijacked by theatrics. I will always stand firm in defending the policies that benefit all Americans, and I will always stand firm in defending our right to have a conversation based on facts. If you want to challenge me, do it with facts, not with provocations. This is about accountability, and I will hold the line. As the press team sent out the statement, Karoline leaned back in her chair. She could already imagine the backlash that would follow. The media would spin her words, find ways to twist them into a different narrative. But she was done playing their game. She had made her statement. The ball was now in their court. Her phone buzzed again, but she didn't reach for it. The media had already chosen how to spin this. What mattered now was that she had shown the world she would not back down. The silence in the room felt more powerful than anything she had said. Karoline's final word wasn't just the statement she made. It was the quiet resolve behind it. In a world where truth was subjective and narratives were often controlled by those with the loudest voices, she had proven that control could be taken back. And though the fallout would continue, she knew one thing for certain. She had won the battle for control in that room, and no headline would change that. The story, as it unfolded, was no longer just about the confrontation. It was about the nature of truth, control, and accountability. Karoline had made her stand, and the question that lingered was whether the world would see it for what it was. A stand for integrity, or a moment of power misused. It was now out of her hands.